All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Lowdown. I am your host, Misha Aravena, and today we are talking about the Star Wars prequel trilogy. But before we begin, let me introduce my panel. I have Mr. Alex Pope.
Yo!
And I have, that's it, that's all I gotta say. I have Mr. Andrew Stupart.
Misa Jar Jar Binks.
I knew we were going to get a Jar Jar Binks impression there. I knew it was coming. All right, guys. So I'll say to our audience out there, if you haven't seen our original Star Wars talk, you can get that in the link below in the description. Check that out to hear our thoughts on the original trilogy. But now let's talk the inevitable prequel trilogy. So probably 1999, the most anticipated film, I would say, of all time. Now, this was my first Star Wars film that I saw in the theater outside of the re-releases, probably for all of us, all of our generation, because we were too young for the original trilogy. So it was very, very disappointing to some. Some people loved it, but a little bit of trivia, when George Lucas wrote this film, his original treatment was for all 6 of these films. But of course, that was way too big to put into one movie. So he chose to only make the middle part into a movie, and that became the original trilogy. Why he chose only the middle part, nobody knows. I can't find any information on that, but that's why he decided to do that. And when he was writing The Phantom Menace, he originally wanted Anakin Skywalker to be a teenager in his about 17, 18 years old. And when he was about halfway through the script, he decided to change that and make it into a young boy, because he thought him being separated from his mother would make him a more sympathetic character and impact the story a little bit more. I thought that was a nice little piece of trivia, because honestly, he should have kept it with Anakin starting at around 17, 18 years old. But anyway, movie was released 1999, and I'll give my thoughts as well as Alex, but I'll throw it over to you, Andrew. Maybe give us some initial thoughts before this film came out in 1999.
Thanks so much, Misha. I appreciate the opportunity to come on again and chat about, in Star Wars Part 2. And obviously, when people say Star Wars and they just throw out that term, most people would imagine the original trilogy. I'm thinking New Hope, Empire, Jedi. Those are like the core. Those are the originals. And while there was some that 16-year hiatus when people are like, where's there going to be another trilogy? When's that happening? When can we see Darth Vader becoming Darth Vader and the rise of the Empire? And finally, after all this discussion, George Lucas did it. He had planned to do it earlier, and then it really only came to the point where after going through all the pre-production and all that it was slated for 1999. And it was perfect timing because, to your point earlier, Misha, the re-releases, the 20th anniversary was in 1997. And as I said in the last episode, I remember going with my mom and seeing Star Wars for the first time on the big screen, the originals, when they were re-released. And then as you said, Misha, you have all this anticipation. I was 13 at the time in 1999. You're like, okay, we're finally going to see episode 1, which we've been waiting for 20 years here. It finally comes after a 16-year hiatus since Return of the Jedi. And I walked out of that as a 13-year-old being like, that was cool, but it wasn't as good as the originals. And
even at 13, you knew. You know what? I'll just interrupt you for a second with that. I have an image. I was 9 when I saw it, and I still have the image burned in my mind of Darth Maul getting cut in half and falling down that shaft. I can still remember that, but go ahead.
Oh, for sure. That was one of the best scenes in the movie, the Duel of the Fates. Like John Williams continued to conduct and compose again for this trilogy. And so we have that Duel of the Fates scene, which is one of the most iconic scenes from Phantom Menace. And it's just a fantastic scene. But I guess my overall point is that it's hard to live up to the originals. And I remember walking out of that when I was 13, and I was just like, that was a Star Wars movie. It was good, but it just didn't quite hold a candle to the original series.
I think people came in with way too much hype.
That was it, because with that 16-year hiatus, there's so much built up anticipation. How can you live up to the original? So I guess at this point, I'll throw it over to Alex and see if he has anything additional to say on the introduction of this topic.
Yeah. Get us started, Alex.
Yeah, so I would say I was one of those bitter Star Wars fans, raised during that 16-year hiatus, and yeah, when I finally got to see it, it's like the bubble burst for me. Like Star Wars used to be like a universe where you could just sort of get lost in it, and your imagination could take you. But the 3D animations just really took you out of that experience. Because it just, when Phantom Menace came out, 3D animation just isn't where it is today. It was still
when you watch them now, they're a bit dated. It looks like a video game, a high-end video game for sure.
Well, you know what? I refer to it as Who Framed Roger Rabbit. If anybody ever saw that movie.
Robert Zemeckis, 1989, yes.
That's a classic.
Who Framed Roger Rabbit really sums up how I felt about the movie, except Who Framed Roger Rabbit was actually a better movie.
You know what, I Alex, I don't want to interrupt you, but just now that you brought up Who Framed Roger Rabbit, because I am a Robert Zemeckis fan, and I am a big fan of that movie. That came out when I was 3 years old, and I remember my mom showing me that movie. They had taped it off, my parents had taped it off TV on a VHS. And quite frankly, they do a better job of merging that 2D animation. You have, Mickey. That was one of the ones where you have Mickey, you have the Disney and the Looney Tunes coming together, and they actually did a better job of marrying the 2D animation with the real life than they did with the 3D animation in real life in Star Wars. So I think
that was 10 years prior too.
Yeah,
it was. No, I agree, Alex. I agree with you.
But I guess I'll start this off a little bit too. You know what? I'm going to talk about the pros of Phantom Menace first. So one thing I think, and this extends to all the prequels as well. So George Lucas wanted a much faster, a much more spirited, lively kind of lightsaber fighting. Because in the originals, all we got were basically young boys training to be Jedis, old mentors fighting, or guys in big robot suits fighting. Whereas this, with the prequels, this was now the prime of the Jedi, right? They're all in their prime. So he wanted a much more energetic fighting style. So he hired this stunt coordinator. I believe his name was Nick Gillard, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Someone in the comments will correct me. But he came in and he infused this energetic fighting style. And they hired a stunt coordinator. His name was Ray Park, I should say. And they were so impressed with his movement that they cast him as Darth Maul, and he was only supposed to be a stunt guy. So the best sequence for me in the film is the lightsaber duel between Obi-Wan Kenobi, Qui-Gon Jinn, Darth Maul. And that's not necessarily because of character and story. It's just a badass fight. It's really well choreographed. And that's about the end of my praise.
That was the best scene in the entire movie.
It is. That scene holds up. It's one of the best. Now, I think the lightsaber duel in Empire and Return of the Jedi is better because there's more going on with the characters, more internal turmoil. But in terms of just fight choreography,
if awesome. I can add a couple things to that point, because I've come back to watch this as an adult. I'm a little bit more forgiving now, and I look at it and I've got to admit, like, there was hundreds of thousands of man hours that went into this, and some incredibly talented people, even in episode 1, working in the background. One of my favorite humans, Adam Savage, worked on this in his younger days. And, when you look at just like the design of the sets, the music was incredible. But where it really fell apart was the 3D animation and the characters and dialogue. That really ruined it for me. But really, like, if I can just ignore that for a second, there was so much talent that went into this, and you got to give them credit for that. So.
Yeah, and I'll jump off that, Alex, because I think you summed it up really well. And I think if I had to look at the trilogy as a whole, I mean, we will dissect each film separately, Misha, and I don't want to take away from that, but I think you summed it up very well, Alex. And I think the fundamental flaw with all three, but especially with Phantom Menace, is it has not only, as you said, the visionaries, the tech geniuses, the animators who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to bring this thing to life, which I agree, there's so much talent there.
Yeah.
But I think that my main criticism would be the fact that it's a flawed film and that it has some really wonderful moments. There's some golden nuggets. There's the debate whether we want to train Anakin. He's too old, or he has too much fear in him. He's been taken away from his mother, so there's that fear that he's attached to his mother, and that could cause issues. And then that Qui-Gon Jinn has to make that decision to go against the council and basically defy them, and then go and make that decision to train Anakin. So there are some amazing moments. The lightsaber battle with Darth Maul, seeing the beginnings of Anakin Skywalker, where he comes from as a slave. I really like the pod race scene. People can criticize it for the animation, but I thought the pod race scene was great. The problem is, to Alex's point, there's so many faults in it that it just takes away from it. So again, the CGI. And if I may, Misha, if it's okay with you, I'll talk briefly about CGI.
Yeah, for sure.
I think the biggest mistake is that they had people like Natalie Portman, Liam Neeson, Ewan McGregor, and Jake Lloyd. Poor Jake Lloyd, the young boy who played Anakin. Oof, that's a whole.
Man, he got screwed. He got on like antidepressants and stuff.
Oh, for sure. His life was ruined, man, after that role. He got bullied for it, but I digress. The point is, they had these.
He was terrible in the movie, though.
But you don't deserve to have your life ruined because of it.
No. But the point I'm making is they had all these talented actors standing in front of a fucking green screen for 9 hours a day shooting, and you lose some of the imagination and some of the artistic integrity and motivation when you're just acting in front of a fucking green screen.
Yeah.
And I think that was fundamental flaw number one. And I think
it becomes synthetic, stiff.
Well, it's a budgetary thing, and also we were on this trend in the 90s that we saw with Terminator, Terminator Part 2. James Cameron developed that technology for the T-1000, who was an antagonist that was fully computer animated whenever he was morphing around. Jurassic Park's followed, by Spielberg, and James Cameron lent his technology to Spielberg. Toy Story, the original, came in 1995, which was a full 3D movie, full feature length. And then riding off the coattails of this 3D wave was Phantom Menace. And I think their biggest mistake was just not doing enough practical effects and just really capitalizing too much on the 3D technology at the time that you mentioned, Alex.
They should have combined the two, the practical with the CGI, and found that balance. But
for sure.
I do want to go back to what you said, the pod race scene I didn't mention. That is actually, take away some of the CGI. It is a very exciting, suspenseful scene. That's one of the only scenes besides the Duel of Fates action sequences where I actually felt invested. Okay, this is actually getting me excited. But I want to talk about the writing and some of the performances. I don't know what George Lucas's direction was for these prequels, but it's like he was telling every actor, okay, act rigid, stiff, and have no emotion. Don't be a human being. And as an audience, that's what we want to see. We want to see characters with flaws, characters that have triumphs and obstacles. And there was none of that. I thought the only actor that captured that, not only in Phantom Menace, but the rest, was Ewan McGregor. I thought he was very good. He captured the Alec Guinness performance. But other than that, even Liam Neeson, who I love as an actor, my God, he was fucking awful in Phantom Menace. He really stiff as well.
Tell us what you really think, Misha.
Well, I think it's a George Lucas thing. I think it's the way George Lucas is directing them. And then some of the racist stereotypes, you don't see it as a kid, but like the Asian Trade Federation officials at the beginning. Jar Jar Binks, clearly like a Jamaican racist stereotype. And as a kid, go ahead, Alex.
I think what that is like, and you see it in a lot of Disney movies and stuff these days, where they're really trying to get everybody in the world to like this movie.
Yeah.
They don't want to leave anybody out. And that was one of the biggest flaws, in my opinion, was that there was a major identity crisis with this movie when it came down to the plot. Like, was it for kids or was it for adults? And they never really hashed that out properly, because I think a lot of the debating and stuff and a lot of the basic plot line that was going on was kind of like a little too cerebral for children, and really boring for anybody that's under the age of, let's say, 30. And then you've got these zany 3D animation sequences that are just so brutally zany that no adult could contain their gag reflex for more than 30 seconds watching Jar Jar Binks boink around the scene. Like, it was so freaking annoying to watch as an adult. And they just like, they totally screwed up because they needed to go one direction or the other, or just take a softer approach with the kids stuff. You know, the kids love
Alex,
stuff like that.
I'll jump in on that, just because I again, you've made some really good points tonight, and I think you've done a really good job of summing up some of the key good points as well as some of the key negative points of the film. And I think this commentary that I'm about to make can actually span across all three films. I know we will touch on all three separately, but I think, you know, to your point, now as an adult, I take a step back and I watch the political stuff, and I love it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to play devil's advocate here, because I think Alex, you're right in that as a 13, 14, 17-year-old, if I'm rewatching these as a teenager, I wouldn't appreciate all the political stuff, the trade embargo against Naboo, the manipulation that Darth Sidious / Senator Palpatine / Chancellor Palpatine does as pulling the strings as the puppet master. You know, and as a 15-year-old, I wouldn't get that. But now as a 34-year-old, 35-year-old, when I go to watch that, I'm in awe of the fact that George was so well able to tell this story of, really, there's two story arcs here. There's the Darth Vader story arc, and between the first trilogy and the second trilogy, the prequels and the main trilogy, you see the rise, the reign, and then the fall of Darth Vader. It goes from young Anakin, teenage Anakin, full-fledged Jedi, Sith, and then redemption at the end, as we talked about at the end of Return of the Jedi. So there's that story arc, but then on top of that, there's the story arc of the galaxy. And I think we have to pay some attention to that, because really, if you look at the canon and you look at where Sidious / Palpatine came from, being a senator and then manipulating the trade wars behind the scenes with the Trade Federation and the droids, and then working subsequently with Count Dooku, and then using Dooku to be the head of the separatists. And then, you know, he's still maintaining the facade as this well-meaning chancellor who's looking to protect the Republic. And then finally, it all comes to fruition, and we'll talk about it in more detail later, as it becomes the Empire. Without the droids and without the battle, the battle droids and the clones and all that, there wouldn't have been an empire. You needed all that political shit in the background that needed to be there in order for the rise of the empire. I just wanted to put that point out.
There's the one good thing the prequels do really well that we'll get to the sequel trilogy. There's a lot of good world building. The expansive universe truly expands. But just to wrap Phantom Menace up, you know, for me, I do have some nostalgia for Phantom Menace, so that goes into my rating, but I'd give it about a C. How about you guys?
I'm totally I give it a D. Like, it's nowhere, not even anywhere near good. I just cannot do it to this day.
All right, Andrew.
You know what? I'm going to give it a B-, only because I think it does have, to your point, it is a flawed film, but there are some redeeming moments in it. I don't want to write it off. Is it as good as New Hope or Empire? Absolutely fucking not. It doesn't come close to Empire or New Hope or Jedi. That being said, there are some, I don't want to write it off.
There's enough to enjoy. Certainly not the worst in the entire series, but nowhere near the best. All right, guys, let's move on to 2002's Attack of the Clones. So obviously Jake Lloyd was a little bit too young to come back to play the older Anakin, so they auditioned hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of actors between the ages of 25 and 32. And they ended up settling on Hayden Christensen, who is a fellow Canadian. So I was always proud of that. I was always cheering him when I was younger, but unfortunately he wasn't very strong. And we'll get to that. Basically, now you have a clone army rising underneath the nose of the Galactic Republic. But it came out, and for me, this is not the worst in the series, but it's definitely the most boring, unimaginative, stale, and unmemorable Star Wars film. Like we talked about Phantom Menace, there are some great moments. In this one, I can't really think of anything. This is just a meh, stale film. I'll throw it over to you, Alex, first, and tell us what you think about Attack of the Clones.
I mean, the only thing that comes to my mind when I think Attack of the Clones, and keep in mind, I did just watch it 2 days ago, was Natalie Portman hitting on Justin Bieber for 3 hours. That's all I got.
I love it, Alex. I love it.
Did you guys see something else? But yeah, I don't know. And yeah, there's just something about the way they did that love story that was just so uninteresting to me and so brutally long and drawn out. We all knew what was going to happen. They're going to hook up. They're going to have 2 babies. We know it. Like, can we just like get that part over with and have some like cool lightsaber stuff? I don't know.
Yeah,
oh, of course.
Yeah.
It gets everywhere. Whatever that line was, he said.
Oh, it's brutal. It's brutal.
All right, go ahead, Andrew.
Alex, I can't echo what you've said enough more. You took the words right out of my mouth. And it's not to the you know, it's not to criticize Natalie Portman, because I think Natalie Portman's a strong actress and she proved herself in what was that movie, The Black Swan?
Black Swan, V for Vendetta. She's fantastic.
Yeah, V for Vendetta. She was fantastic in V for Vendetta and Black Swan. So to her personally, I like her. And what I like about Natalie Portman's character, and that we get to explore with her in the prequel movies, is that she really is, you know, you can tell that Carrie Fisher and her are related. You know what I mean? You can tell that that's Carrie Fisher's mother, because really she's a strong woman. She's a strong woman, much in the way that we see, you know, Princess Leia, even though she's a damsel in distress in the Death Star in A New Hope, and you know, Han's trying to, you know, rescue her with Luke, and she ends up taking charge of that rescue mission, much in the same way that Natalie Portman's character of Padme is a very vocal voice in the Senate, and going back to that whole political element of it, she really is a major voice in terms of making change in the galaxy and trying to take back the democracy. And I think what really ruined her you know, performance was having to go up against Hayden Christensen, who isn't that bad. I mean, I think people give him a lot of a tough time.
He gets better in the next one.
He gets better.
Their chemistry is
not the worst. I think the fundamental flaw of episode 2 goes back to the fact, I hate to say it, that George Lucas wrote it. Yeah. And if you remember correctly, he didn't write Empire, and he did not write or direct Jedi. And so you have George Lucas returning to be the writer as well as the director of these prequels, and he's not good at dialogue. George is a high-level thinker. He's good at building characters, building worlds, building technology, and creating that universe, as you say, Alex.
Yeah, he's an ideas man.
He's terrible at fucking dialogue. He's fucking terrible at dialogue, and I think it was the dialogue that killed the prequels.
Yeah. I guess I'll start off with the positives. I do like some of the actors he has in Attack of the Clones. It's clear Lucas was a big Hammer horror film fan from the 50s. So you got Christopher Lee, who gives a very menacing performance as Count Dooku. He's got a lot of power and grace on screen, but he's given nothing to do, hardly anything to do in the film. And I like Jango Fett. I like the idea of the clone army, and I like seeing where Boba Fett came from and how that all transpired. That's probably the best sequence in the film for me. What's planet's called Camo or something? I can't remember.
Camino,
yeah. That entire sequence is probably the best sequence for me, but I'll get to the good stuff now. What sucks, again, you have all that's the CGI, and it feels even more so. I don't know. There's CGI chairs in some of those scenes. Why do you have to CGI furniture? Just put a table there. Like it gets to a point where we are now making a cartoon. I said in my previous show that I loved the character of Yoda because you get this image of a warrior and he's got to be 6'2", muscular, and Yoda wasn't that. It's about what's underneath. But here we see him fighting, and I know some people loved it, but as soon as he started doing all those flips, I went, nah, man, that's not what Yoda's about. You might
I'm going to cut into Alex's time because I know Alex has some thoughts here, but I'm going to fucking interrupt anyway because I don't care. Misha, as much as I appreciate the sentiment behind it, because I agree, you know, in Empire, everyone was shocked when we see this little Martian looking dude, as I said in the last film, and you're, you know, and Luke's kind of like, okay, where's Yoda, blah 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 blah. So I understand that, and I understand he's supposed to be this sage, wise, cool, calm and collected, you know, Grand Master of the Jedi.
You loved it.
When I saw him go up against Count Dooku in Attack of the Clones, I remember being in the theater with my friend, and we were both 16, and my friend and I jumped out of our fucking seats, and my heart exploded and my face turned numbness went through my face. Like, that's how emotional I was to see him just going at it against Count Dooku as this little 3-foot dude. Like, my heart exploded, and that's one of my favorite scenes in the entire movie. So agree to disagree on that one.
Well, that's why we're doing this show, everyone out there, because we're going to have different viewpoints. Because when I saw that in the theater, I sank and went, oh God, that was stupid. But anyway, I'll throw it over to you, Alex. Any more thoughts on Attack of the Clones?
I just want to go back to that scene. I partially agree with Stoops there. I really think that like in Empire, it was kind of a challenge to the Yoda character, being like, okay, so you're supposed to be this, you know, this warrior dude. Like, how does that even work when you're only a foot tall? So I think like we had to see it. We had to see it at some point. So it wasn't what I always imagined it might be. And really, I think they really overdid the CGI on Yoda's face and everything like that. He looked like a completely different character, but I don't think there was a choice. You tell the audience this guy is a Jedi warrior. You got to show him in action at some point.
Yeah. And you know what? They made Yoda CGI in Attack of the Clones because they knew that scene was going to be coming up. But sure. I'll throw out one last point with Attack of the Clones. I look back on Hayden Christensen, and I just think, as a performer myself, you know, any male actor at that time, 25 to 32, you're going to be playing the young Anakin Skywalker and show the fall into becoming Darth Vader. That must have been the most sought after role in all of Hollywood at that time. And you can't tell me, out of the hundreds of people that auditioned, that was the best guy you could find. And I actually thought of this today. You know who would have been great if he was age appropriate at that time? Would have been Adam Driver, who plays Kylo Ren. Imagine him as Anakin Skywalker. He would have been brilliant.
I'm gonna ride off that point for a second, because this was something I was thinking about. And if you look at Luke, who is the uncle of Kylo Ren, and then Kylo Ren's grandfather is Anakin Skywalker, all three of them are whiny little bitches, right? That's the whole point. That's the whole fucking point, is because you have, oh, I want to go to Tosche Station and get some power converters. Like, Anakin, or sorry, I should say Luke Skywalker from the original. That was the whole point. He's like this nerdy farm boy with no sense of responsibility, except for the fact that he wants to go and join the rebellion. But he wants to go play with his friends and pick up some power converters, whatever. And so he's a whiny little bitch who becomes this greater than life Jedi later on, after taking on Yoda's teachings. Number one. Number two, in the prequel trilogy, you have Hayden Christensen. There was a reason behind that, because he's a bit of a little bitch too, because that's his father. That's Luke's father, right? So like, you want to see, you know, that there's this continuation of like, there's a bunch of little bitches in the Skywalker, you know, bloodline, but they become so much more powerful. So
it connects.
I kind of have to debate the casting choice a little bit about Hayden Christensen, because there's something there.
Absolutely. All right, so we have a pro Hayden Christensen supporter. Very nice. And to his credit, I do like the guy, and I wish him well. I wish he had actually more of a career, but alas. So anyway, let's move on to the last film. And for me, well, Attack of the Clones, I'd give that one about a D. It's near the bottom for me. But Revenge of the Sith comes out. People were very, very excited for this film because it's what we wanted to see. I'll argue that the prequel trilogy didn't have to be a whole trilogy. It could have been maybe 2 films, but this was finally the fall of Hayden Christensen. And for my money, I do think this is one of the best Star Wars films. Not as good as the original trilogy, but I thought it was very, very satisfying. Some of the writing is still a little bit stiff and awkward, but not quite as much. There's a lot less for me to nitpick here. And ultimately, I left the theater very satisfied from seeing this film. Alex, your thoughts?
I would disagree. I think there's lots to nitpick. But I think when I watch an action sequence, something that's really important to me is plausibility. And sure. And there's just so much, and I think you see it more and more these days in all the Avengers movies and stuff like that. You're seeing these like escapes, like you put the character in the trash compactor, right? And they have the key with them, and they just have to use it properly to get out of the trash compactor. You know, and they do that, you know, several times throughout this movie, and the way that they get out is very like hand of God plucking them out of the nasty situation.
It's a little too convenient. Yeah,
they didn't earn it, and they just like, you know, you've got characters flying, you know, like down elevator shafts and making these incredibly miraculous escapes, and it's hard to watch. Like, I want to actually be like, holy crap, that's a brilliant solution to that problem, but there's just, you can't even follow it, you know.
Fair. Andrew, some of your thoughts on Revenge?
You know, I have to agree with that. I think that, I don't think it's definitely not the best out of the entire 9 films. It's definitely not. It's much better than Phantom Menace and much better than Attack of the Clones for sure. Mm-hmm. And I think it's because ultimately, you know, to state the obvious, you're seeing that final downfall of Hayden Christensen going from Anakin to Sith Darth Vader. And I could talk for a whole hour about this movie, but looking at our counter, we have 7 minutes left. So just to summarize, I think it's what everyone anticipated, because they had seen the 4, 5, and 6. They had seen 1 and 2, but there was still that missing puzzle piece of how he actually became Darth Vader. And I think my favorite scene, just to sum it up briefly, I mean, there's a lot, but there's 2. First of all, the myth of Darth Plagueis the Wise, where
the opera scene.
The opera scene where Senator Palpatine / Sidious has to poison Anakin, and he poisons him a little bit throughout all 3 of the movies, but most of the poisoning happens in the 3rd one, where you see that transition, and he makes that choice where he's not going to trust the Jedi anymore, because the Jedi are out to get the Chancellor, and the Chancellor has succeeded in poisoning him and turning him. And there's that scene where Mace Windu says, okay, if what you say is true, well, you have earned our trust. And they go to the Chancellor's meeting room, his office or whatever, and they confront him. And that's when the Emperor becomes the Emperor with his electrical lightning storm powers, and throws Mace Windu out the window. And finally, you know, Anakin has to make that choice, where, you know, if his wife is going to survive, if his beloved Padme and their unborn children are going to survive, then he has to become Darth Vader. And that's the turning point. And I jumped out of my fucking seat in the theater when I saw that scene, and I was blown away by that transition, not only from the Emperor, from Chancellor becoming Emperor, but also from Skywalker becoming Vader. It was just a moment that I'll never be able to get out of my head.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely appreciated the darker tone. That's something that I was waiting for. I thought that's what made this a successful movie for me. The opera scene when he says, "Is it possible to obtain this power not from a Jedi?"
Oh,
That's
yeah,
the
that's a key.
seduction scene. You know, that's
Oh.
when Anakin starts thinking, hey, maybe I want to do this. But and then the lightsaber fight between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker goes on a tad bit too long, but I'm willing to forgive that because it's so grandiose and it leads to, you know, you were the chosen one, you were my brother. And I believe their relationship had built up enough that that moment was earned and great.
Yes.
One moment that I hate, though, I don't know if you guys will, when the kids are finally born and the little robot says, oh, she has lost the will to live. And that's how Padme dies. I always thought that was like, wait a minute, how did that happen? She just decided, oh, life's too hard, I'm going to die. And that was a bit of a reach for me. And then when Darth Vader, you know, the universal horror Frankenstein, he's getting out of the, no, I have to admit, everyone in the theater erupted in laughter at that moment. But it's funny because the moment before that, when they put on the mask and he finally breathes, chills in my body. Exactly. But then then 30 seconds later, it was a belly laugh. No. But anyway, some final thoughts, guys. I'm very satisfied with Revenge of the Sith. I'd give this an A- on my scale.
Yeah.
It's one of the higher up for me. What about you, Alex?
Oh boy, I definitely would give it a lot better than episode 1, of course. Better than episode 2. But still not great. I'm still gonna give it like a C+.
So you don't really like any of them, any of the
Honestly,
prequels?
I wouldn't have watched them if I didn't have to for this podcast. So.
That's some honesty right there. How about you, Andrew?
You know what? I would go along with that A- just because it very well, it does an amazing job of wrapping everything up. And you know, as I said, it really shows that transition, you know, into the into the Empire, which is where we take the story when we go into New Hope. So it's just a beautiful film. It is flawed, and I don't want to downplay the fact that there are flaws in the writing and the dialogue, etc. But overall, a very satisfying film to watch.
Yeah, I will say, if all of the films had been on the level of Revenge of the Sith in the prequels, it would have been a very satisfying trilogy. I think most Star Wars fans would go, you know what, it wasn't perfect, but overall, that was really, really nice. So I guess we'll leave it at that, guys. Tune in for our next show. I guess you can guess what it will be. We'll be discussing the Disney sequel trilogy. If you like what you heard and you saw, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe. And this is Andrew, Alex, and Misha signing off on the Lockdown Lowdown. We will see you next time.